Hello, my name is Thaddeus, and together with information provided by David Benish and Laura Brace, I'm going to provide you with an abbreviated recap of Japanese advancements into Southeast Asia and the American response. In 1931, Japan, needing natural resources, invaded Manchuria, a region in the northeastern portion of China. This is known as the Mukden Incident. The action was a direct rebuff of the Washington Treaties signed in 1921 and 1922, which guaranteed to maintain the balance of power in Asia and recognize the sovereignty of China. The League of Nations was unable to enforce a request to have Japan leave Manchuria, and China was forced to accept this invasion and the occupation of some of its territories. In 1937, the Marco Polo Bridge incident incited a war between China and Japan. This war would eventually stall into stalemate and force Japan to make decisions on how to strategically proceed. The stalemate between China and Japan in 1939 and 1940 was caused, in part, due to the United States and Soviet Union's support of nationalist and communist Chinese forces. The United States permitted the Flying Tigers to provide air support, while the Soviet Union sent weapons and advisors to China. The war was draining valuable resources from Japan, and a desire for more resources was becoming pressing. Japan needed to decide whether to invade the north or advance to the south of their stalemate line to acquire more resources to continue fighting the Chinese. The northern strategy would mean attacking the Soviet Union and drawing them into a larger war. These resources available would only be accessible during the summertime. The southern strategy would mean attacking the colonial territories of the European nations while they were distracted with the war against Germany. Japan was in need of oil, rubber, and metals to succeed in the war against China. Facing embargoes from the United States, Japan looked to the French, British, and Dutch colonies for access to the resources that they required. Determining that going south would be the best course of action, Japan felt a preemptive strike against the United States fleet would be the best way to gain an upper hand, and would provide them with time to exploit territories and resources to continue their fight with China. The economic and strategic choices faced by Japan played a large part in the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, thus transforming the war into a truly global war. After the attack, Japan was able to pursue action in Southeast Asia. By the start of Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, the strategic momentum was already pulling the Japanese forces to pursue the southern approach. The occupation of northern Indochina in late 1940 was critically important to Japan because it was an important rice-producing area. It also cut off China's supply route to the south and provided an important harbor access at Haiphong. Japanese movement into British-held Burma was not as economically important as Malaysia, but it contained the last overland route from Europe and America to China by way of the Burma Road. Initially, the Japanese used diplomatic pressure to close the road in 1940, but by the start of 1942, the Japanese army cut the road's access to the sea. Much of the Allied strategy for the remainder of the war was devoted to reopening this road. Indochina was particularly important to the Japanese, as it provided a base to carry out aerial raids and also air support to the Japanese advancement into the Southwest Pacific. The Imperial Army's southern advancement along both coasts of the Malay Peninsula met opposition from Commonwealth troops. However, the lack of air and naval support and combat experience against a more seasoned Japanese army resulted in the outflanking of the Allied troops all the way to Singapore. While the British Army expected the Japanese invasion of Singapore to occur from the south by way of the sea, the Imperial Army crossed onto the island through the Johor Strait. The Netherlands Indies, now known as Indonesia, were a more important economic goal for the Japanese leaders than was Malay, due to its valuable oil resources on Sumatra. In addition, the island had an abundance of raw materials and other food resources. The vast islands, some 18,000 in all, were impossible to defend with the small Dutch forces available. Like the British, French, and Dutch, the United States had vulnerable colonies west of Hawaii, including its most important possession, the Philippine Islands. While there was little economic benefit for the Japanese in taking the Philippines, its strategic importance was critical in that it flanked the sea lanes from Japan to Southeast Asia. By taking the key areas of Burma, the Philippine Islands, British Malay, Singapore, Borneo, and the Netherlands Indies, the Japanese were able to open up expansion both south and west and disrupt Chinese supply lines from its allies. Western New Guinea, also under Dutch control, covered the northern approaches to Australia, and along with the Solomon and Gilbert Islands is where the Japanese advancement ended, with America's entrance into the South Pacific, starting with the Battle of the Coral Sea. While American and British strategic planners had hashed out a Germany first strategy through the Arcadia Conference in late 1941 and 1942, America continued to send an equal number of divisions and air groups to the Pacific when compared to its European theater. The mentality behind this strategy is clearly displayed by General George C. Marshall at the Casablanca Conference in the following year as he provides evidence of the offensive operations in the Coral Sea that had blocked the Japanese attempts to seize Port Moresby. Following the Doolittle Raid in April 1942, the Japanese Naval General Staff allowed Admiral Yamamoto to attack Midway Island in an effort to lure the American fleet into a decisive battle and seize the island to cover the eastern approaches to Japan. The Japanese also attempted to split the power of the United States forces through a feint when they seized the two Aleutian Islands off the Alaskan coast, which you can see in the map below. These efforts were unsuccessful, and while the United States Navy lost the USS Yorktown, the Japanese lost all 4 aircraft carriers that they committed to the campaign. This victory provided the Americans with the first opportunity to sustain an offensive operation against the Japanese forces in Rabaul by seizing Guadalcanal. Powerful personalities in the form of the Army's General MacArthur and the Navy's Admirals Nimitz and King disagreed on how to pursue Japanese forces, and ended up mounting twin offensives with the forces aligned under MacArthur pursuing the tested and proven approaches of the Southwest Pacific, while those under Admirals Nimitz and King attempted to achieve victory by the most direct and central route to Japan. While these offensives pursued separate axes of advance, they shared common features in the fact that they had the same general geographic objective, the Philippines. While the Central Pacific Campaign advanced through the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, and the Caroline Islands, General Douglas MacArthur's force seized the Solomon Islands and made multiple amphibious landings on the northeastern coast of New Guinea. In late 1944, both task forces converged and conducted amphibious operations to seize Leyte in the Philippines. The island hopping strategy allowed these forces to pick and choose when and where they struck. Additionally, it allowed United States forces to bypass heavily fortified islands and seize the less protected areas, which in turn isolated the stronger defenses.